Hello and welcome to Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and joining me on the program today is Peter Maurer. He is the Calaveras County Planning Director. Peter, welcome.
Thank you.
Very nice to have you on the show. You and your department have a great deal of influence over how our county is shaped now and in the future, and so I'm really pleased to have you here to update the folks on a lot of different very important issues. So thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Before we get into talking about the Butte Fire and the general plan and the asphalt plant and some other items that have come to the forefront, I just wanted to give anyone who doesn't know you a little introduction. So could you tell us where you grew up and how you kind of came to be in this county in this position?
Well, I'm a native Californian, grew up primarily in the Bay Area. I've got a planning degree from CSU Chico. After bouncing around and trying some different fields of study for several years, been about 30 years now working in the field of county planning, Douglas County, Nevada. Spent 28 years in El Dorado County, and then the opportunity came down here to become a planning director. I wanted to move down here, so 2 years ago they offered me the job, and I jumped at it. So here I am.
And how's it been so far?
It's been great. I have a wonderful staff, better than I could have imagined. It's a wonderful community. There's always challenges in any job like this, especially at this level, but I'm really having a good time.
Great. You mentioned that you had considered some different things when you were, back in your younger days when you were still figuring things out. What were other career paths that you kind of thought might be fun at one time or another?
Oh, I really wanted to work outdoors, so I thought about forestry. I have a love of foreign language. I thought about being an interpreter for a while. Was studying natural resources management at Cal Poly for a bit. But really it was maybe traveling in Europe for a while and growing up in the San Jose area that sort of made me feel that maybe the way we build our communities could be different. And that got me interested in planning and where I landed.
Very cool. So you mentioned that you spent a long time to the north a little bit in El Dorado. Was it difficult for you to think about leaving a place that you had called home for so long to come down to Calaveras?
Well, I think the time was right for me to leave. My children had grown, leaving the house. At the time when they were, in school, didn't want to disrupt the family. But it was just a good time personally for me as well as professionally. I was sort of in the point of where I was repeating what I had done several times before in the old job as principal planner in El Dorado County. So I felt it was time for a change. Was good. So no, it wasn't that difficult to leave. Okay.
And did you end up moving down to Calaveras?
Yes, I live in Murphys.
Live in Murphys now. And do you have family here or a brother? Or?
My brother lives also in Murphys. He's a longtime school teacher at Bret Harte High School.
Okay.
And we're identical twins, so people get us confused once in a while.
So identical twins, what was it like growing up with a twin? That must have been interesting.
Well, my response is, what's it like not growing up with a twin? I have no idea how to compare. It has its pros and cons. You had to share everything, but you also had always had a playmate, always had a friend with you to do stuff with. So it has its pros and cons.
So let me ask you this: have you ever switched and not told the person that it wasn't you, it was your brother? Have you ever pulled one over on people?
We tried that once in 6th grade, and it lasted about 15 minutes.
15 minutes?
Yeah.
Who found out?
All the rest of the classmates were giggling because they knew it, but the teacher didn't know until she asked Keith, my brother, what was their assignment for reading or something, and he answered instead of me. So.
Okay, got it. You mentioned foreign languages too, and that's interesting to me. What languages are you most interested in?
Well, I took Spanish all through elementary school and high school. Decided with my German background that German would be fun to learn, and then I had an opportunity to travel and live in Norway, so I learned Norwegian.
Wow.
I tried learning Polish last year. That's a very difficult language. But
So are you going to give up on it, or are you going to keep trying? What do you
I'll
think?
keep trying.
Okay. All right, very cool. So you've been in Calaveras for a couple years living here. What has stood out for you about this county so far?
I think it's a sense of community, which I really enjoy the most. Just, the involvement of people here, just the love of the various communities that they live in, whether it's Valley Springs or Mountain Ranch or Murphy's, no matter where you live, people have a really strong sense of community, which I really find enjoyable. And in Murphy's, where we live there's, everyone volunteers for things, people are really supportive. It's just a great aspect of the community that I hadn't expected and experienced it before.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I hear that really often. It seems like a lot of people who come on have noticed what a neat community we have here. So I feel very fortunate to have grown up in a place like this.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned you like outdoors, so I can imagine this is just like El Dorado, kind of an outdoor playground.
Well, there's all kinds of wonderful opportunities, hiking and biking and skiing and the kind of activities I enjoy.
Yeah. Okay, so you took over as the planning director. Had you ever been in a position where you were overseeing entire department, or is this the first time where you were really in charge?
I had served twice as the acting director in El Dorado County when they were having changeovers of directors, and never really thought I wanted to be a director. Too much pressure, the political risk. But I felt at this point in my career, I could manage it. And if the board gets tired of me, I could always say, "Fine, I'm done." But no, it's I've supervised up to 14 people before. Right now I have a staff of 5. So it's really not that much different than larger jurisdiction of intermediary manager that I was before.
So if anything, this is a little bit smaller than where you came from when you were doing that kind of stuff. Okay. Have you found more than just being interim, but long-term management, is that especially challenging, or is it something that you think comes naturally to you?
I don't think it comes naturally to anyone. It's something that you end up learning on the job. Most people are promoted from a line position. They're a good planner, so they get promoted to a supervisor, a manager, and there's never any real training for that. You just sort of have to learn it. If you're lucky, you get sent to some classes about how to manage people, but it's something that you have to develop. It's a skill. I have a pretty laid-back attitude towards staff. I expect them to work professionally and get the job done. I don't try to micromanage, but I have pretty high expectations of what they will do. And when they live up to that expectation, things are good.
Absolutely. So you said staff of 5 right now?
Yes.
Okay. And what kind of positions do you have under you? What are the various positions there?
I have an administrative assistant and 4 planners. Right now I have Planner 2 and 3 Planner 3s. It varies between Planner 1, 2, or 3, and it's just the mix is constantly changing. Okay. We have another staff planner that starts next Monday, which I'm excited about, to have the full contingent of staffing finally.
So you're actually getting a staff member. I'll tell you what, it seems like I haven't heard over the past few years much about new staff coming in. It's always we don't have enough money. So how is your budget looking right now?
We've been pretty frugal, but things are picking up in our department, which is good. And so we've been able to afford hiring new staff. Part of it was cutting back on some of the consultant costs that we had with the general plan. We decided to do that more in-house, although we do have one small consultant that's working with us, but not the large consultant contracts that we had before. So shifting that money over to in-house resources, I felt was a better use of our funds.
And yet, by taking on more of the general plan, I imagine that takes away from other things.
Oh, yes. And it's primarily my responsibility. So, I do get help from the other staff once in a while. It's been primarily me doing that. So, but I knew that going in, so I've tried to just allocate my time. It's taken a huge amount of time recently because we're going through the general plan hearings with the Planning Commission right now. We're working our way through the element. Once the elements are done, we'll get into the community plans, and finally we'll sort of wrap up with the final version of the land use map. So we've got several months more of review by the commission. They're doing a very thorough and deliberative review of the draft plan, editing it as we go through the elements. We've done land use, noise, the background report, and we're on the resource production element, agriculture, forestry, and mining right now.
There are some elements that are required, and then there are other optional elements. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do we have kind of a mix of both, or are we sticking with just the required ones?
We have a mix of both, and we've sort of combined some Don't ask me to name the 7 elements. I know there are 7 required ones, but I can never remember each one.
I
But
won't
there's,
ask you.
land use and circulation and safety and noise. Those are some of the required ones. The added ones that we have are public facilities and resource production. So those are the optional elements.
And I know at one point, some months ago, there was kind of a question put out to the public of, do we want a water element or not? Or maybe it was put out to the Planning Commission. And that was kind of discussed, and that was decided maybe not to be included, right?
Right. It was last June. We had a joint board planning commission workshop, and we asked the board, and the board had been giving prior direction to my predecessors. And just before I started, there was a workshop that Brent Harrington, the interim director, held with the board, and pretty much the direction at that point was let's keep it to the minimum necessary, with the exception of the agricultural element. I went back and wanted to make sure, because there was a lot of comments during the public comment on the draft plan that was released last December. We want the water element. We want to have the community plans put back in. And in June, the board decided, well, yes, we'll keep some of the community plans, those that are close to being finished. We don't need a water element. However, we've added a bunch of water policies and discussion of water in the public facilities and services element. So in a way, we have that in there, just not a standalone element. Similarly, with economic development, we've added a bunch of policies related to economic development in land use. And it's sort of scattered throughout some of the other elements as well. So we haven't ignored those issues, just not have them stand alone as a separate element.
And I suppose it's always kind of a balance between who has what role. Does the planning department or the county, run water? Then there's also county water districts that have some say over how water is used. And so I suppose it's always kind of a, how does this fit together and how do we do this in the right way?
Well, exactly. As a county, typically different from most cities, where cities have their own fire departments, their own water departments, a variety of things. In many counties, particularly rural ones like ours, there are a lot of separate agencies. So we've got several different fire districts, several different water districts. And while we can have some generalized policies, most of the real decision making is made by those agencies on their own. So close coordination is primarily what we're working with. Or looking towards with those districts.
So I feel like I need to back up for a minute, because you and I, especially you, have a really good understanding of what a general plan is. But for those who may not be up to speed or following this, so just let's back up for a second. What is a general plan, and what is going on right now in the county with regards to it?
Well, the state mandates that every city and county have a general plan, and it's primarily sort of the guiding document for development and county activities over an extended period of time. Typical horizon is about 20 years. It's not set in 20 years you have to redo it. It's just that's about how far you can look forward into the future with any sense of predictability without just going way out on a limb. So we look at all the potential, what we have today, what are our resources, what are the needs, how can we address those needs, looking at growth potential, what are the infrastructure requirements, trying to put all that together in a packet that guides the county into the future as to how we want to develop and how the county spends its money as well.
So it's like you're putting out a roadmap of some stuff that's near term, but also, like you said, maybe 20 years into the future. And I imagine that this is something that you come back and revisit, and all kinds of things have changed, and then you have to kind of maybe go in a slightly different direction. But that's why it's important to revisit these things?
Well, the meat of the document are the goals, policies, and implementation measures. And so we establish some goals. Here's what we want to do. Here's our policies that help us get to that goal. And then what specifically are we going to do? And each year, we should be looking at those implementation measures, identify what we've done, what have been successful, what's the next priority. And you can only do so much. So we've got a long list of things we'd like to do. The top priority is going to be these 3 or 4. Here's how we can afford to do that. Here's our budget for it. Okay, go forth and hire the consultants, or set aside the staff to work on those programs. Periodically, every few years, you should look at that plan and say, how are we doing? are our assumptions that we made going into the plan still valid? Right now, we're making the assumption that over the next 20 years, the county as a whole will see about 10,000 new people come to the county, population growth, either through births or immigration into the county. 9,000 of those in the county itself, the other 1,000 to the city of Angels Camp, which is a separate jurisdiction. What happens if we suddenly get a huge increase in population that we didn't expect? We need to go back and adjust. Do we have enough land? Do we have enough commercial land to support the infrastructure needs, the retail needs of a growing citizenry? Are the population demographics different than what we expected? We're also required by the state to update our housing element every 5 years. That's the only one that's reviewed and approved by the state and has very specific mandates of what has to be in it and what we look at. So that's a very complex process. We just finished that last year, and so we'll be looking at doing that again in 2019. But in the meantime, we'll get the rest of all the elements to be adopted. They have to be internally consistent. So we can't be saying one thing on one side and something is inconsistent in another element. And that's where the linkage between, say, the circulation and land use has to be very clearly established. That if we're having growth over here, how do we get water and sewer and roads to support that kind of population? So you have to be constantly looking at that and saying, are the areas that we anticipated growing as we expected? If not, do we need to shift things around? Do we need to shift resources? Do we need to modify policies? Are there policies in place that aren't doing what we want them to do? Are they constraining development where we want to promote development, or vice versa? Are there resources that are being lost that we really want to promote or conserve in some way or another? So that's sort of the constant analysis that should be done. It shouldn't just be put on a shelf and forgotten. It should be utilized on a regular basis, not just in reviewing development applications, but even with capital improvement plans. Which road should we improve this year because of growth pressures in certain areas? How do we work with the fire departments and the water agencies to extend sewer lines or water lines or build new fire stations? So that's the kind of coordination that the general plan is supposed to assist with.
Got it. And you mentioned that there would be kind of a list of goals and top priorities, and then of course those get revisited, but are we far enough along in the process to where some of those goals have risen to the top in priorities? Do you have kind of an idea of what those are at this point?
No, we're not there yet.
Okay.
We're still establishing what the goals and policies are. So that's this process we're in right now. The implementation measures are there. We've identified who would need to do it. But once the plan's adopted, then the board would need to sit down and go over that list of implementation programs and say, okay, here's what we want to do. I sort of have an idea of what I think would be the top priorities, and obviously updating our zoning ordinance and zoning map to be consistent with the general plan would be one of those. But there's many other things that would need to be done as well.
So to the zoning map, is zoning basically how you can use a particular property, what uses are allowed within that zone? Or is there a better way to explain that?
Yes, that's a good, simple explanation of it. So the general plan has a land use map that has land use designations, and there's sort of a broad umbrella. So commercial here, residential here, mixed use over here. Within each of those land use designations, you might have 2 or 3 or 4 different zones. So you have different kinds of commercial zones, different industrial zones, different zones that would work within the mixed use areas. So that gets more specific. So, broad brush, general plan, here's where the community areas are. Now within that community, you have the more specific zoning, commercial professional office here, multifamily housing over here. And that would then list what the development standards are, and the density, and the types of uses that are allowed within the zoning.
And so would that be where the community plans would come in, more specifics on what they want for their community? And like you said, if they're far enough along or done, some of those could be incorporated into the plan?
Right. So the board said, yes, I think, even though we said previously, no, don't include the community plans, it will take too much time. There was such a demand from the public comments that we got that they wanted the community plans in, that the board said, I think maybe we could do that for some of them. There are a few that just we haven't started them, or there's too much controversy involved that it would bog down the whole process, and we do need to get the general plan adopted. But there are some, particularly those in District 2, that were fairly well along, and they provide a little bit more detail rather than looking at the whole county as a whole. Let's just focus on this community, and how do we establish the land use, and are there any unique policies that are applicable to just that community and not countywide.
I don't know how long ago this was, but there was at one point like a 40-acre minimum for some of the more rural areas in terms of if you wanted to split properties up. What direction is the general plan going in terms of development, in terms of breaking up large pieces and making smaller pieces? Is the direction to kind of keep a lot of large pieces out there, or allow landowners more freedom to make smaller pieces out of those?
Well, I think that's probably the biggest issue right now that's facing the whole general plan process, is what will the land use pattern be? And I think that the draft that came out in December was trying to focus development more closely to the existing communities where there's infrastructure available. The costs of providing sewer and water and roads is less than if it's a very broadly dispersed population. But there is an argument, a desire by others in the community to continue to allow the use of properties that are more rural and dispersed to develop into smaller acreage parcels. In protecting the agricultural land and timberland and encroachments of development into those areas is a part of the plan, so that you don't put a lot of smaller lots right next to timberland, and then create some of that conflict, or agricultural land, avoiding the conflicts of those conflicting uses is something that we're trying to also incorporate.
So is that not completely decided yet, how that's going to shake out?
The jury's still out, you could say, on that one.
Okay. Well, so tell us, how can people get involved? What are the next steps? Are there more meetings that are coming up? Or?
Yes, the Planning Commission is meeting regularly. We started in August, and we've had actually a lot of extra meetings. Our regular meetings are set for the second and fourth Thursdays of each month, and typically the regular business of the commission is taking care of the conditional use permits and other hearings. On the first and third Thursdays of each month now, we've been holding special hearings on the general plan as they work through the language of each element. Next Thursday, the 17th, we should be wrapping up the land use, or the resource production element, and then have a little break over the holidays and start up on circulation or open space, or one of the other elements that we're working on right now, which everyone sort of gets wrapped up.
Okay.
Right now what I'm doing is trying to incorporate the comments, and we had well over 1,000 pages of comment letters that we're trying to identify. These are applicable comments, and I think that that's a good idea. Let's add that to the plan. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. The Planning Commission has received all of those. They've had the opportunity to go over the comments. They're also putting their own informed spin on what they think is appropriate for the county. And that's where the political nature of a general plan comes in. We've got different opinions of the way the county should grow. The hearings are public hearings, so public is invited to comment. We'll accept written comments as well. But clearly showing up and stating your opinion at the workshops, at the hearings, are an important part of the process. And
I'm not going to hold you to this, but best case scenario, when we might have this thing wrapped up, what year?
2017.
Okay.
I hope. and I say that we've got several more months of work with the Planning Commission. We've got the rest of the elements, we've got the community plans, and then the land use map to go through. Once that's done, the whole package will go before the Board of Supervisors, and it's unknown how long they will take. They may want to go through the whole process again and modify the recommendations of the Planning Commission. Once the board says, yeah, we're good to go with this, then we start the EIR process. There is a 1-year minimum on that, and depending on the amount of comments that we receive on that, the length of time it takes to respond to those comments and complete the final EIR, it could take longer than that. But a year minimum is sort of the standard rule for preparing an EIR. Then we get into final adoption hearings. So we've got at least another year to go, possibly longer. But I'm hoping 2017 will be the year.
I'm going to switch gears on you here.
Okay.
Can you give me the 3-minute summary of the asphalt plant which is proposed for the Valley Springs area near Hogan Dam?
Okay, so early last summer, I had a request to install an asphalt plant. I reviewed the county code and determined that it's a use allowed by right under our code, even though it was not really clear. That was challenged. The Planning Commission and the Board ruled that my finding was correct. There's another provision in the code that says, however, even a use allowed by right must be reviewed by the environmental health officer, and if the health officer makes a finding that there may be a significant impact on the environment, a conditional use permit is required. That was appealed by the asphalt plant proponents. It was heard back in August. The Commission continued that pending some additional information. We finally got that recently from the proponents, and it's scheduled to be heard tomorrow at the board or the Planning Commission to make the determination of whether or not the conditional use permit would be required.
And if it wasn't required, could they pretty much move forward?
Well, they still have to prepare an EIR because of the air pollution permit that is also required under state law that our Air Pollution Control District regulates. And that issuance of that permit was also determined to be discretionary and subject to the California Environmental Quality Act. And some type of CEQA document will need to be prepared, most likely in an EIR, just because of the complexity of an asphalt plant.
So is it safe to say that the plant is not going to be up and running until these things have been reviewed?
That's safe to say that, yes.
Okay, because I know that this has been a very contentious topic. A lot of people have strong opinions one way or the other.
That's a very accurate statement.
Okay, so I don't know if people are going to see this in time to go to that meeting tomorrow, but there will be more meetings on this. And
we expect that whatever result the Planning Commission makes, it'll be appealed to the board. So probably sometime in January, we'll have a further appeal to the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, so not going away anytime soon.
No.
All right. Well, I appreciate the quick summary on that. And I wish we had more time to go into the Butte fire, but I know that your staff has worked hard to do what it can to help in those efforts, and that will be incorporated into future planning and looked at. I know you're looking at that. We're just out of time, unfortunately. So will you come back and maybe we can delve into the Butte fire more?
Certainly, it'd be enjoyable.
And maybe update the viewers on the general plan.
Of course.
Okay.
You'd enjoy that.
All right. Well, Peter, we're so glad that you came down from El Dorado, and I know I've heard nothing but great things about your work. So thanks for coming in, and I hope that you're successful where your predecessors have not been to bring this general plan home.
So do I, and thanks for having me tonight.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it. And thank you for joining me on this edition of Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and I hope you join me next time.